Hello, my friends. Your support means a lot. Please like, comment, and subscribe.
I'd always thought being home alone was exciting. At 14, I felt like I had entered a world where responsibility mixed with freedom. And that first night my parents went out for a weekend trip, I was thrilled. My house was old but familiar, the kind of place where every squeak in the floorboards felt like an echo of home rather than a threat. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The evening started like any other. I made a sandwich, turned on the television, and settled into the couch with a blanket. The sky outside had faded to a dark, velvet blue, the kind that made shadows in your room feel sharper. I was just finishing a rerun of some sitcom when I heard it. A soft knock, almost imperceptible at the front door. I froze. The first thought that came to my mind was that it could be a neighbor, but it was almost 10 o'clock at night. No one knocks at our door this late. Hello, I called out, my voice braver than I felt. Nothing, just the silence of the house. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, probably just the wind rattling something outside. I went to the window and peeked out. The street was empty, bathed in the dull glow of the streetlights. No one in sight. I exhaled and returned to the couch, feeling a little foolish. The night carried on uneventfully, or so I thought. Around midnight, the house groaned. I know every sound in my house, or I thought I did, but this was different. A slow, deliberate creak coming from the hallway leading to the bedrooms. I sat up straight, heart hammering. I live alone in the house when my parents aren't around. My first instinct was to grab a baseball bat I keep near the door. I held it tightly, listening. Nothing. The sound had stopped. I shook my head. Maybe it was the old wood settling again. Then I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't loud, but it was there unmistakably soft, just at the threshold of my hearing. I couldn't make out what it said, but it sounded urgent, like it wanted my attention. I scanned the living room, flashlight in hand, checking every shadow, every corner. Nothing. The whispering stopped, but a new sound began. Slow, dragging footsteps coming from the hallway outside my room. My blood ran cold. Whoever, or whatever, it wasn't supposed to be there. I backed away into the corner of my room, bat ready, praying it wouldn't come in. The footsteps paused outside my door. My breathing grew louder, a panicked rhythm I could barely control. And then I heard it, a whisper right at my ear, though the door was still closed. You shouldn't be alone. I bolted up. My mind raced. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe I had dozed off on the couch and imagined everything. But I could feel it, the unmistakable sense of someone watching me. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed my phone. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling, but the line was dead. No signal. My chest tightened. This house, my sanctuary, was suddenly alien. Then, from the living room, I heard a laugh. Not a playful laugh, not a child's laugh, but one that was low, slow, and suffocating. It made my skin crawl, the kind of sound that rattles your chest and freezes your blood. I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere safe. I ran to the back door, trying it, but it was locked. And not just locked, it felt as if someone had jammed it. My mind was spinning. I thought about hiding in the pantry, maybe even the attic. Anything. But before I could decide, the temperature in the house dropped. I could see my breath. The lights flickered, then went out completely. I was in darkness. My only company, the whispering that had resumed, moving closer, circling me like a predator. It said my name. I don't know how it knew my name. I'd never told anyone about being home alone this weekend. My heart hammered as I stumbled backward, tripping over the carpet. I could hear the dragging footsteps again, closer this time. And then I saw it. Not clearly, just a shadow, darker than the darkness around it, moving across the wall. It wasn't human. I can't explain it, but the shape twisted almost impossibly, with limbs bending wrong, moving with a predatory grace. I screamed, louder than I ever had in my life, and bolted for the stairs. I ran up two at a time, heart racing, knowing that if it caught me, I would never see daylight again. The attic door was just ahead. I yanked it open and climbed inside, slamming it shut behind me. The attic was dark, cramped, and filled with old boxes and forgotten furniture. I crouched behind a stack of crates, shaking. The whispering didn't stop. In fact, it seemed closer, like it was just on the other side of the thin wooden floor beneath me. Then silence. I waited, breathing shallowly, praying I had escaped. Minutes passed like hours. Then I heard it, scratching, from beneath me. Something or someone was trying to get up into the attic. I couldn't move. My body wouldn't obey. I just watched, frozen with terror, as the scratching grew louder, more insistent. And then it stopped. I didn't dare move for what felt like forever. When I finally summoned the courage, I peeked over the crates. Nothing. The floorboards were empty, no sign of entry. No shadow, no presence. Just the eerie quiet of my house and the sense that I was being watched. I spent the rest of the night in the attic, too afraid to descend. When morning finally came, sunlight streamed through the small attic window, and I convinced myself it had all been a nightmare. Maybe sleep deprivation. Maybe fear had made me imagine things. But then I saw it, a single handprint on the outside of the attic door. Small, impossibly pale, like nothing human. I called my parents immediately, but they thought I was imagining things. The police came, checked the house, found nothing. Nothing at all. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints. Just my story and the lingering terror in my mind. That weekend changed everything. I haven't been home alone since. I don't know what it was, and I don't think I want to. But sometimes at night, I swear I can hear a whisper just outside my door calling my name. And I know that if I ever let my guard down, it will come back. Some nights, I'll lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house, knowing I'm not alone. And I wonder if it's always been here, waiting for the perfect moment. Waiting for me. I used to believe Alaska was quiet in a way that healed you. That was before I learned there are different kinds of quiet. The kind you choose, like sitting alone at night with the lights off. And the kind that chooses you, presses down on your ears, and makes you aware that if something decided to move out there, you would hear it long before you could do anything about it. This happened 7 years ago, and I've told almost no one the full story. When I do, people usually decide where the lie must be and patch it over so they can sleep again. I don't blame them. I've done the same thing in my own head, try to label parts of it as exhaustion, isolation, or fear-induced hallucinations. But there are details that don't bend no matter how hard I push them. Details that still wake me up with the taste of cold metal in my mouth. I went to Alaska for work. That's the boring truth, and I wish the story stayed boring. I was hired as a seasonal maintenance contractor for a remote research station about 70 miles from the nearest town. The station sat near the edge of a frozen river system, surrounded by spruce forests that went on for miles without interruption. No road led all the way there. In summer, you could get in by bush plane or boat. In winter, it was snowmobile or nothing. I arrived in late October, when the daylight was already thinning and the ground had hardened into something between dirt and ice. The station had been partially shut down for the winter, but a skeleton crew stayed on to maintain equipment and collect long-term environmental data. There were 5 of us total, 2 researchers, a radio operator, a cook, and me. I was there to keep generators alive, fix what broke, and make sure the place didn't freeze itself to death. The first week passed without incident. We settled into routines. Mornings were quiet, afternoons quieter. Nights were long and filled with the hum of machines and the occasional howl of wind slipping through the trees like a living thing. Wildlife was common enough. Moose tracks near the river, foxes darting between shadows, but nothing felt threatening. If anything, it felt peaceful in that lonely, end-of-the-world kind of way. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday night, though at the time it barely registered as strange. I was on generator check, walking the short path between buildings with my headlamp cutting a narrow tunnel through the dark. The temperature had dropped fast, colder than the forecast predicted, and the air had that brittle quality where every breath felt loud. Halfway to the generator shed, I heard footsteps behind me. That alone wasn't alarming. The others moved around at night, sometimes. I stopped and turned, expecting to see one of the researchers bundled up and half asleep. There was no one there. My headlamp showed undisturbed snow, smooth except for my own boot prints leading back to the main building. I stood still, listening. Nothing moved. No wind. No crunch of snow. Just the low mechanical thrum of the generator ahead of me. I told myself it was my own steps echoing weirdly through the cold air. Sound does strange things in extreme temperatures. I'd read that somewhere. I finished my check and went back inside without mentioning it to anyone. Over the next few days, it happened again. Always at night. Always when I was alone. The sound was never rushed, never heavy. Just a steady, deliberate pace, like someone walking without urgency. When I stopped, it stopped. When I turned around, there was nothing. By the 4th time, I mentioned it to Mark, the radio operator, while we were drinking bad coffee in the break room. Probably a fox, he said without looking up from his notebook. They'll follow people sometimes. Curious little bastards. Foxes walk like people now, I asked. Mark smiled thinly. In the dark, your brain fills in gaps, especially out here. That was a common answer in Alaska. Out here, as if the land itself bent rules in ways we just accepted. The next incident didn't leave as much room for explanation. I woke up to knocking. Not pounding, not frantic, just 3 slow knocks, evenly spaced, coming from the outer door of the maintenance building where I slept. I checked my watch. It was 2:17 a.m. I lay still for a moment, listening. The knocking came again. 3 knocks. Calm, patient. My first thought was that something had gone wrong with the generators. My second was that no one knocked like that in an emergency. Still, I pulled on boots and a jacket and grabbed my flashlight. When I opened the inner door, the cold hit me like a slap. The outer door was frosted over, the small window opaque with ice. I hesitated, hand on the handle. Yeah, I called out, feeling stupid the moment the word left my mouth. No answer. I opened the door. There was no one there. The snow in front of the building was untouched, a smooth white sheet stretching into darkness. The silence felt heavier than usual, thick enough that my ears rang. I stood there longer than I should have, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing moved. No eyes reflected back. Eventually, I shut the door and locked it, telling myself someone had knocked earlier and the sound had carried through the cold, echoing in a way that messed with my sense of distance. That explanation lasted until morning when I noticed the marks. 3 impressions, shallow but distinct, pressed into the frost on the door itself. Not scratches, not damage, just areas where the ice had been disturbed, as if something warm had pressed there and lingered for a second too long. I didn't tell anyone about that part. Things escalated after the first heavy snowfall. The world shrank, the forest closing in as visibility dropped and the sky became a permanent gray lid. We spent more time indoors. The radio crackled more often, mostly with static. Mark said solar interference was messing with signals. Then the voices started. At first, it was just my name. I heard it while fixing a jammed door hinge near the storage shed. Clear as day, someone behind me said my name in a low, familiar voice. I turned, annoyed, expecting to see one of the researchers messing with me. No one was there. This time, the snow wasn't pristine. There were tracks near the shed, my own from earlier, overlapping in messy patterns, but nothing fresh. No new prints. No sign anyone had been close enough to speak. Later that day, I heard Mark's voice calling from the river. That one scared me enough to stop walking. I was heading back from checking equipment when I heard him shout my name again, louder this time, urgent. It came from the direction of the frozen river, about a quarter-mile away. Mark had no reason to be out there. He hated the cold and rarely left the main building. I stood frozen, listening. "Help me," his voice called. It sounded right. The cadence, the slight rasp. But something about it was off, like hearing a recording played through bad speakers. I didn't answer. I waited. The voice repeated itself. Same words, same tone. No panic, no change, just the same request looping. I turned around and walked back to the station as fast as I could without breaking into a run. That night, the knocking came again. 3 knocks, always 3. I didn't open the door. The next morning, Mark didn't show up for breakfast. That wasn't unusual on its own, but when the cook went to check on him, she came back pale and shaking. Mark's room was empty. His bed was neatly made. His winter boots were gone. There were no signs of struggle. No. The radio was still on, humming quietly. We searched for him for 2 days, following every possible route he could have taken. The snow swallowed tracks quickly, but even so, there was nothing. No broken branches, no disturbed drifts. It was as if he had simply stepped out of existence. After the search was officially called off, something changed in the atmosphere of the station. The silence felt watchful. The generators seemed louder at night, their hum taking on a pulsing rhythm that made sleep difficult. I started dreaming of footsteps circling my bed, stopping just out of sight. One night, I woke up to my own voice. I was lying on my bunk when I heard myself speaking outside the door, calling my name softly, coaxingly. The sound was perfect, every inflection, every breath. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice repeated the words, then laughed. It was my laugh, but wrong somehow, stretched and hollow. That was the night I decided to leave, contract be damned. The weather didn't cooperate. A storm rolled in fast and violent, grounding any chance of evacuation. We were stuck for at least another week. The remaining researcher, Ellen, finally admitted she'd been hearing things too. Whispers at the edge of her hearing. Her dead mother's voice calling from the trees. She'd grown up in Alaska and believed deeply that some places weren't meant to be occupied for long. There are things that learn, she said quietly, staring at the wall. They listen first. The final incident happened 3 nights later. The knocking came earlier than usual, just after sunset. 3 knocks, closer than before, as if coming from inside the building rather than the door. The lights flickered. The generators faltered. Then the knocking moved. It traveled down the hallway, slow and methodical, knocking on each door in turn. 3 knocks per door. When it reached mine, it paused longer than usual. I held my breath, clutching a wrench like it could save me. On the other side of the door, something began to speak. It used Mark's voice first, then Ellen's, then mine. It cycled through them, testing, adjusting. When it settled on my voice again, it spoke clearly. "Let me in. It's cold." The door handle didn't turn. It didn't need to. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of something breathing, deep and satisfied. The storm broke the next morning, and a rescue team arrived that afternoon after receiving a garbled distress signal. They found the station intact. 3 people alive, 1 missing. They also found footprints around the main building. Not human, not animal. Long, uneven impressions pressed deep into the snow, circling the station again and again, never quite touching the walls. I left Alaska as soon as I could. I don't work remote jobs anymore. I don't answer doors at night unless I'm expecting someone. And sometimes, when it's very quiet, I hear 3 slow knocks coming from inside my walls. Always patient. Always waiting. The first thing I noticed when I boarded the Ocean Empress was how unreal it felt. The ship was massive, gliding along the port like it didn't belong in the world of stationary, normal things. I had always dreamed of a luxury cruise, thinking it would be a vacation from reality. But as the gangplank retracted and the city disappeared behind me, I felt that old, hollow dread I used to get as a child when my parents drove me to a stranger's house. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't explain why. I tried to shake it off as I explored my cabin. The room was pristine, unnaturally clean, with that faint smell of chlorine and plastic you always find on boats. I opened the curtains to see the endless blue of the ocean and the horizon stretching into nothingness. That should have been calming. Instead, it made me feel like we were suspended in some kind of vacuum, isolated and exposed. The first night, I wandered the decks. The other passengers were cheerful, a little loud, swaying slightly as the ship cut through the waves. I heard music from a lounge somewhere below, and laughter bounced up to me. But there were shadows too, people in the corners of hallways, pausing in ways that didn't make sense. When I looked, they were gone. I chalked it up to motion sickness, fatigue, the uncanny angles of a moving ship. By the second day, the weather turned. Thick fog rolled over the ocean, swallowing the horizon. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the ship's horn sounded louder than usual, echoing into the gray void. Crew members seemed tense, exchanging looks I couldn't read. One of them, a young man who introduced himself as Mark, gave me a half smile and muttered, "You'll see soon enough." "See what?" I asked. But he was gone before I could press him further. That night, I woke to a sound like water lapping against metal, but slower, deliberate, almost like someone was walking inside the hull itself. I got out of bed, tracing it down the hall. The lights flickered. I passed empty cabins, doors closed, curtains drawn, and the sound followed me, echoing in odd places. When I reached the main corridor, it stopped abruptly. I looked out a porthole at the black ocean and saw a figure standing on the deck, staring at me. I froze. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, but the unease had taken root deep in my gut. The next day, passengers began disappearing. At first, it was subtle, one or two people not showing up at breakfast or skipping a scheduled activity. The crew told everyone not to worry, citing illness or seasickness, but the pattern was too consistent. By the evening, 3 passengers were officially missing, and panic buzzed quietly among the guests. The ship's captain, a gaunt man with a pale face and eyes like ice, called an emergency meeting. His voice was calm, too calm. He said nothing about disappearances, only that the fog was dangerous and we should remain inside our cabins. But when I returned to mine, the key card wouldn't work. I wasn't allowed in. I wandered the decks in a growing panic. Fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Then I saw it, a figure pale and dripping, standing in a mist. I approached cautiously. Its face was featureless, smooth as porcelain, but I could sense it watching me, studying me. Before I could react, it dissolved into the fog, leaving only a whisper of cold air in its wake. That night, the ship's interior changed. Hallways that should have been straight twisted unnaturally. Stairs led to dead ends. Doors opened into walls. I began to hear voices, passengers calling for help, crying, laughing, but when I tried to respond, the sounds moved farther away. The ship had become a labyrinth, and it was alive. I met Mark again in the galley, clutching a flashlight. "It's not just the fog," he said, eyes wide. "The ship, it's hungry." "What do you mean?" I asked. "People disappear," he whispered, "not just by accident. It wants them, and it doesn't like being resisted." Before I could question him further, the lights went out completely. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, jittery shadows. In that red glow, I saw them, shapes moving along the walls, stretching, twisting impossibly long. Some were passengers, or what remained of them, crawling like insects along the bulkhead. Their eyes glowed faintly, empty but aware. I ran. The corridors twisted and stretched, and I swear I saw entire sections of the ship disappear when I looked back. I ended up in a theater, a grand hall where we had watched a movie earlier. The seats were overturned, and the fog was inside now, curling around the ceiling like smoke. And then I heard it, a voice deep and resonant, coming from the fog. "Why are you awake?" it asked. I couldn't see the speaker, but I knew it was the ship. The voice seemed to crawl inside my head. "You don't belong here," it said. "You belong below." I ran again, down stairwells that no longer made sense, past corridors that seemed to go on forever. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against my chest. I stumbled into the crew area, hoping anyone could help me, but the crew were wrong. Their movements were jerky, puppet-like, their faces stretched in ways that weren't human. They didn't speak, only followed me with those lifeless, hollow eyes. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time lost meaning. I found a lifeboat, swinging gently on its davit. I jumped in, breaking free from the grip of the ship. Water slapped against the hull as I paddled away. And for a moment, I thought I was free. But then I looked back. The Ocean Empress was gone. Not sunk, not far away. Just gone. No fog, no hull, no decks, no lights. Nothing but empty ocean. I was rescued days later, but I told no one everything I saw. Authorities dismissed my story as delirium caused by isolation and seasickness. They even asked if I had been drinking. But I know the truth. I saw the ship. I know what it took. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I feel it watching me from beyond the waves, waiting. I've learned to never board a cruise ship again. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I see the fog, the twisted corridors, and the faceless passengers. I hear the deep, resonant voice calling from the water, and I remember the hunger of the Ocean Empress. The last thing I saw before it vanished was its message. Next time, you won't get away. I don't know if I ever will. I'd always loved national parks. The quiet, the way the trees towered overhead like sentinels, the air sharp and alive with the smell of pine and earth. So when my friends bailed on our summer camping trip, I decided I wouldn't let it go to waste. I packed my old tent, my gear, and a headlamp and drove to one of the more remote parks in the Rockies. I didn't want crowds, didn't want noise, just me, the wilderness, and maybe a good story to tell when I got back. The first day was perfect. I hiked a trail that led to a waterfall I'd seen in pictures. It roared louder than I expected, and the mist left my skin sticky. I snapped a few photos, laughed at how alone I felt, but how good it was. By the time I set up my tent at a secluded campsite near the trailhead, the sun was just slipping behind the jagged peaks. That's when I first noticed something off. It wasn't obvious. There was no shape lurking behind the trees, no sudden sound, just the feeling like I'd walked into a space that wasn't meant for me. My skin prickled, but I brushed it off as exhaustion. National parks can feel eerie when you're alone, I told myself. Night fell quickly. The temperature dropped, and I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, listening to the night's sounds. The wind rustling the branches, an owl somewhere far off, the occasional snap of a twig. Then I heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought I imagined it. I sat up, squinting into the blackness outside my tent, and heard it again. Hey. It was soft, almost hesitant. My heart raced. My first thought was another camper, maybe playing a prank. I zipped up the tent and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself the wind was playing tricks with my mind. But then the whisper came again. This time, it wasn't one voice. It was many, overlapping, almost like the forest itself was trying to speak. I didn't sleep much that night. Every snap of a branch, every rustle of leaves sounded deliberate. By morning, I was jittery, but convinced I'd just been paranoid. I packed up, decided to hike deeper into the park. There was a trail that led to a high ridge, one I hadn't seen crowded with other hikers. It promised isolation, solitude, and maybe a better sense of why I'd come here. I shouldn't have gone. By midday, I was following a narrow, barely there path that twisted through dense pines. Sunlight flickered through the canopy, and for a moment, it felt peaceful. But the further I walked, the more the forest seemed to close in. I noticed the trees weren't just tall, they were old, gnarled, their bark twisted like something alive. And then I saw them, carvings. At first, I thought they were old trail markers, but no trail I knew used symbols like this. They weren't letters or numbers. They were shapes sharp, jagged, almost teeth-like, scratched deep into the wood. And they weren't random. They seemed to follow me, guiding me deeper. I stopped. Okay, weird, I muttered. My instinct screamed to turn back, but something inside me wanted to see where they led. Hours passed. I kept seeing the carvings. At one point, I realized the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just a suffocating stillness that made my ears ring. I could feel it then, a presence, not human, not animal, but aware of me, watching, waiting. I tried calling out, but my voice sounded wrong, swallowed by the trees. Panic started to claw at my chest. I turned to retrace my steps, but the path I thought I'd come from was gone. Completely gone. I was trapped in a maze of trees that all looked the same. That's when I heard it again. The whisper. Turn back. I froze. The voice was closer this time. Unmistakably human, but distant, hollow. I spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing. Just the trees, all identical, oppressive. I ran. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Passed as I stumbled blindly, my backpack scraping against branches, my breath coming in ragged gasps. And then I saw it. A figure. It wasn't fully formed, more like a shadow between the trees. It moved without sound, gliding toward me, impossibly fast. My instincts told me to run, but my legs refused. Something primal held me in place. Don't move, it said. I did anyway, breaking into a sprint, only to trip and hit the ground hard. Pain shot through my leg. When I looked up, the shadow was gone. Only the carvings remained, darker now, what as if freshly made. Night was coming again. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find shelter. I stumbled across a clearing and found an abandoned ranger cabin. Its door hung open like a warning. Inside, dust and decay, the smell of rot heavy. That's when I saw them. Photos, hundreds of them, tacked haphazardly to the walls. Each one was of hikers, alone, smiling, taking pictures of themselves in the park. But the eyes were scratched out. Every single one. I gagged. On the floor, a journal. I opened it. The handwriting was erratic, frantic. They watch. They wait. They don't like being followed. They take those who stray too far. I'm next. Next. The words blurred as panic took hold. I needed to leave. I grabbed my pack, barely looking at the door before running into the night. The forest had changed. Shadows moved where there should be none, the trees bending slightly as if leaning toward me. The whispers returned, more insistent now. Stay, don't go, forever. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed in agony. And then, suddenly, the forest opened. A familiar trail. The sunlight pierced through the trees. Relief hit me like a wave. I'd escaped. Or so I thought. When I reached my car at the trailhead, I noticed something impossible. The carvings. They were there, etched into the hood, deep, fresh, teeth-like. I didn't touch them. I drove, hands trembling on the wheel, never looking back. Back home, I try to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe hallucinations from isolation. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers. I see shadows at the corner of my vision. And sometimes I wake to find tiny scratches, jagged, on my walls, my furniture, my skin. I never went back to the park. I don't plan to. But the thing is, I know it's still there. Watching, waiting, and it's patient. I can't explain it. No one can. And I'm not sure I want them to. I've always been drawn to the mountains. There's a certain clarity up there, a kind of raw honesty that the city can never provide. That's why I agreed to join my old college friends on a week-long hike through the backcountry of the Appalachians last fall. We had all grown up in the East Coast, but none of us had ventured far beyond the beaten trails. And this trip was supposed to be an escape, an adventure that would remind us of our youth. From the moment we started, though, something felt off. The air was too crisp, almost sterile, and the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. We chalked it up to being deep in the mountains, far from any roads or towns. The trail climbed steeply, the kind of incline that makes your lungs burn and your knees ache. And I remember thinking how beautiful it all looked. The trees with their deep reds and oranges, the distant river cutting through the valley like a silver ribbon. But there was an unease under it, like the land was holding its breath. By the third day, we had set up camp near a ridge overlooking a valley that was swallowed in morning fog. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves made me tense, and the wind felt like it was whispering. I told myself it was just nerves, or maybe the wolves someone had warned us about. I was wrong. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound I can't explain. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal I recognized. It was a scraping, rhythmic, and deliberate, coming from the forest below the ridge. At first, I thought one of my friends was moving around, maybe looking for firewood, but when I glanced at their tents, they were all zipped tight. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. My heart thudded, and I froze, staring into the darkness. I told myself it had to be a bear. Bears scrape trees, right? But this wasn't a bear. The sound was too methodical, almost like someone or something was dragging itself along the ground. I whispered to my friend Sam, who was sleeping next to me, but he didn't stir. Finally, I slipped out of the tent and shined my flashlight toward the edge of the tree line. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing. Nothing at all, except the mist swirling around the trunks. I went back inside the tent, trying to calm myself, and eventually drifted back into an uneasy sleep. When morning came, the forest seemed normal again. Too normal. We joked about the noises, calling it mountain ghosts or forest spirits, but the humor didn't reach my eyes. Something was wrong. The next day, we decided to take a different trail, one that led to a ridge a few miles away, where we had heard there was an old, abandoned logging cabin. According to the map, it should have taken us 2 hours to reach it. By noon, we realized we were lost. The trail markers had vanished, replaced by twisted trees and rocky outcrops. Compass and GPS both seemed to misbehave. The needle spun erratically, and the GPS kept showing us back at the campsite. We laughed it off at first, blaming the dense canopy. But as hours dragged on, the unease grew. Around 4 in the afternoon, we came across a small clearing with an old stone fire pit. Nothing unusual about it, except the ground around it was littered with rocks that had been stacked into small towers. Upon closer inspection, they were arranged like crude figures, each rock stacked to resemble a rough human shape. There were dozens of them. They all faced the same direction, the forest. I felt a cold knot in my stomach and stepped back. It's probably just some hikers messing around, I said, but my voice didn't convince even me. We didn't linger. As we moved on, I noticed we were being followed. I couldn't see anything, just the feeling of eyes on us, of shapes moving between the trees. Every time we stopped, the sense of being watched grew stronger. By nightfall, we decided to make camp again, this time under a thick canopy of firs. None of us spoke much. That night was worse. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of someone or something whispering my name. Softly, clearly, but impossible to locate. I shone my flashlight around, and the beam landed on nothing. The others stirred, murmuring in their sleep, but when I whispered to them, they claimed they heard nothing. Then I saw it, or at least what I think I saw. A figure at the edge of the clearing, impossibly thin, taller than any man, moving like it was floating just above the ground. Its face was hidden beneath what looked like a hood of some kind, but the shape was wrong, elongated, distorted. It didn't make a sound, but I could feel it watching me, studying me. I blinked and it was gone. I didn't sleep after that. The whispers continued intermittently, always calling my name, always just beyond the reach of the flashlight. I considered waking the others, but I didn't want to sound crazy. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe the altitude and lack of sleep were making me hallucinate. But the footprints told a different story. At dawn, we followed the trail again, desperate to find our way back to the main path. That's when we found the bodies. I still see them when I close my eyes, old, rotting corpses of hikers, maybe a year or more dead, half buried under leaves and dirt. Some had their limbs twisted at impossible angles. Others looked like they had been drained, hollowed out. There were signs of struggle, of something unnatural. We didn't touch anything. We ran, leaving the trail markers behind, leaving our map, leaving everything. We stumbled for hours until we finally heard a road. We ran toward it and were eventually picked up by a passing motorist, still covered in mud and sweat. We didn't speak much on the drive home. There wasn't anything to say. Back in town, we reported what we saw. The authorities searched the area, but found nothing. No trail, no corpses, no signs of anyone else having been there recently. They suggested we must have gotten turned around, that maybe the bodies were old and had decomposed beyond recognition, or perhaps we imagined it. My friends, surprisingly, seemed okay letting it go, brushing it off as a hallucination or a prank by locals. I couldn't. I returned once, months later, alone. I wanted answers. I hiked the trails I thought we had taken, following the GPS coordinates I had recorded, but the forest was silent, normal, even mundane. No footprints, no fire pit, no figures, nothing. Except the feeling, that same cold, oppressive presence that had followed me in the mountains before. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. I've tried to research it to find any reports of hikers disappearing in that part of the Appalachians, but nothing matches what we saw. It's as if the place exists outside normal time, or as if it erases itself when you try to remember it clearly. Sometimes, though, late at night, I hear my name whispered through the wind. And I remember the figure in the trees, watching, waiting, patient beyond comprehension. I've learned never to doubt the mountains or the silence between the trees. Something is up there, something that doesn't belong to the world we know. And I'm terrified that one day it will call me back. Because once it has marked you, the mountains never let go. I'm going to tell this exactly as it happened to me, because if I change even one detail, it won't make sense, and honestly, it still barely does. I live in a small town in the Midwest, the kind of place where nothing ever makes the news unless someone hits a deer or the high school wins a football game. I was 26 at the time, working night shifts at a warehouse outside town. I didn't have a car back then, so I walked. It was a straight 40-minute walk each way, mostly along a two-lane road with no sidewalks, bordered by trees, empty fields, and the occasional abandoned farmhouse. I'd walked that road hundreds of times. Night walks became routine. You get used to the dark. You learn which sounds matter and which ones don't. Coyotes yipping in the distance? Normal. Wind through cornfields? Normal. The crunch of gravel under your own boots? Reassuring. What happened that night didn't feel like any of those things. It was late October, cold but not freezing, the kind of night where your breath fogs the air, but your hands don't go numb yet. I got off work just after midnight. The moon was out, bright enough to throw pale light over the road, and there were thin clouds drifting across it, like something slowly blinking. About 10 minutes into my walk, I noticed the silence. Not quiet silence. No insects. No distant traffic. No wind. Even my footsteps sounded muted, like the road itself was swallowing the noise. That should have been my first warning, but when you walk at night long enough, you stop reacting to small changes. You assume your brain is filling in gaps. I kept walking. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped immediately. The footsteps stopped too. I waited a few seconds, heart thumping, then turned around. The road behind me stretched empty and straight, disappearing into darkness. No cars, no people, nothing. I told myself it was an echo or my boots hitting gravel weirdly. I turned back around and kept walking. The footsteps started again. This time, slower, careful, like whoever it was didn't want me to hear them. I sped up. The footsteps matched my pace. My chest tightened. I could feel that animal instinct kicking in, the one that doesn't bother with logic. I glanced at the fields to my left and right. Corn had already been harvested, leaving behind jagged stalks and long shadows. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run except straight ahead. I stopped again, more abruptly this time. The footsteps didn't stop right away. They took 2 more steps after I froze, then paused. That was when I knew something was wrong. No normal person misjudges distance like that. If someone was following me, they would have stopped when I did. Unless they weren't walking like a normal person. I turned slowly. About 30 feet behind me, standing in the middle of the road, was a shape. At first, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight. It looked tall and thin, almost stretched like someone had pulled a human silhouette upward. It wasn't moving. It wasn't swaying. It was just there. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking more than I wanted it to. "You okay?" No response. I took a step back. The shape didn't move, but I had the overwhelming sense that it was watching me, even though I couldn't make out a face. The darkness where its head should have been felt heavier than the night around it. I did the stupid thing. I laughed nervously and said, "All right, man, you got me." Still nothing. Then, without warning, it took 1 step forward. It didn't walk. It just appeared closer. Like the space between us folded. Every hair on my body stood up. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear blood rushing in my ears. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran. My lungs burned almost immediately. That road felt longer than it ever had before, like it was stretching out ahead of me, refusing to let me reach anything familiar. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The shape was still there. Except now it was closer, way closer. And it was walking. Its movements are wrong. Its legs bent too many times like joints where joints shouldn't be. Each step covered too much ground, but its upper body stayed completely still like it was gliding while pretending to walk. I screamed. I didn't even recognize my own voice. That's when I saw the farmhouse. About halfway home, there was an old abandoned place on the side of the road. I'd passed it countless times. Windows boarded up, roof sagging, yard overgrown. I never liked it, but at that moment it looked like salvation. I veered off the road and sprinted toward it, gravel spraying under my boots. I didn't care if it was trespassing. I didn't care if it collapsed on me. I just needed walls between me and whatever was behind me. I reached the front porch and practically threw myself up the steps. The front door was hanging crooked on one hinge. I shoved it open and slammed it shut behind me, bracing my weight against it. The house smelled like rot and damp wood. The air inside felt colder, heavier, like it hadn't moved in years. I stood there, gasping, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no sound at all. After a minute, I let myself believe I'd lost it. Maybe it couldn't enter buildings. Maybe it was all in my head. Then I heard a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Right on the door I was leaning against. I froze. My mouth went dry. I couldn't bring myself to move, to speak, to even breathe too loudly. Another knock. Then a voice. "Hey," it said. It sounded almost human. Almost. Like someone imitating the idea of a voice without fully understanding it. "Hey," it said again. "You dropped something." I shook my head violently, even though it couldn't see me. I backed away from the door inch by inch, my foot crunching softly on broken glass. The voice followed me. Not physically. It came from everywhere. "Why are you running?" it asked, now closer, as if it were right behind my ear. I was just walking too. I spun around, heart leaping into my throat, but the room was empty. Moonlight spilled through cracks in the boarded windows, casting warped shadows across the floor. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy, directly above me. The ceiling creaked with each step. I bolted for the back of the house, moving through a kitchen that looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Cabinets hung open. Dishes were smashed on the floor, covered in thick dust. I slipped once, catching myself on the counter, and when I looked down, I saw footprints. Fresh ones. They were barefoot. And wrong. Too long, too narrow. The toes were stretched out like fingers. I ran out the back door into the yard and didn't stop. I didn't care about the pain in my legs or the way my vision was starting to tunnel. I ran toward the road, toward town, toward anything that had lights. When I reached the road, I felt a sudden pressure, like hands grabbing at my shoulders. I stumbled forward and fell hard, scraping my palms on the asphalt. I screamed again and rolled onto my back. Nothing was there. The road was empty. The farmhouse stood silent behind me, dark and lifeless. I got up and ran the rest of the way home without stopping once. I didn't look back again. I didn't slow down until I was inside my apartment, door locked, lights on, shaking so badly I could barely stand. I didn't sleep that night. For weeks afterward, I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my mind playing tricks on me in the dark. I avoided that road, took longer routes, borrowed rides when I could. Eventually, life moved on. Until one night, months later, I was scrolling through local news online and saw a short article buried near the bottom of the page. A body had been found near an abandoned farmhouse outside town. The article said the victim was a man in his 20s. No car, no wallet, no signs of a struggle. Cause of death, exposure. The last line made my stomach drop. Authorities noted footprints near the scene, but were unable to identify them. They did not appear to be made by any known footwear. I stared at that sentence for a long time. I don't walk at night anymore. I moved out of town not long after that. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed, half asleep, I hear footsteps. Not outside. Inside my apartment. Matching my breathing. And every once in a while, right before I drift off, I hear that voice again, calm and patient, like it's been waiting. Why are you running?
Thanks for watching, my friends. If you want more true horror, like, comment, and subscribe.